Well, welcome to our March 2021 Redlands Area Historical Society meeting. My name is Steve Spiller. I'm president of the society, and we're grateful to all of you for joining us this evening, for the many locals as well as those from outside the area. If you're not a member of the Redlands Area Historical Society, we invite you to join by going to the society's website at www.rahs.org under membership, and please join. This evening, an adventure as we bring together the expertise and knowledge of Ben Parker, Tom Ashley, and Ron Running to explore the Redlands timeline, which is accessible on our website. Again, that's www.rahs.org. The timeline is a tremendous resource, a dynamic, fluid resource continually being updated. The timeline was launched in 2018 on the ArcGIS Story Maps platform, a product of our own Esri. Since then, many refinements have been made. After this evening's presentation, we invite you to sit down to your desktop, perhaps your laptop, your tablet, or mobile device, and explore the timeline. Play with it to see where it takes you. Assuredly, you are in for a spectacular journey through our community's history. As a reminder, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our Vice President and Program Chair, Ron Running.
Thanks, Steve. Tonight, we'd like to give our audience a little homework and to fill out this questionnaire. First question is, have you ever used or visited our website? Second, have you used our Explorer app? And third, have you used or visited the Redlands timeline on our website? It looks like you are all busy filling it out. That's fantastic. Well, I'll wait another minute or so we can get the final tally. Prizes will be given at the end of the meeting. While we're waiting for the poll to finish, I want to introduce our panelists tonight. We're having Tom Ashley, because he came up with the topic, the longest title of a program that we've ever had in the Historical Society. He also, many years ago, started compiling a timeline or kind of a chronology of Redlands history every day, clipping out news articles from the local paper. I guess it first started, though, when he was a student intern and he indexed the Citrograph down at the library. Ben Parker has been very instrumental in helping us develop our timeline, as he is a retired software engineer from Esri. He knows all the ins and outs of that program and software, and we have used it in developing our Explorer app and the timeline. Okay, so it looks like the poll that most of you have visited our website, 69%, 74% have not used our Explorer app, so we want to encourage you to try that out. And the timeline is also fairly new, so this is a great opportunity to get involved and learn about the timeline. So this is the homepage of our Historical Society's website. As Steve mentioned, it's rahs.org. And every time you log on, you'll see this homepage with the changing historic photos in the banner. But up at the top, you have our different categories, our homepage, the Heritage Award page, activities, how to join membership, and the far right is our contact information. But the second to the far right is a drop-down menu of resources. This is where you'll find our timeline, the Explorer app, Old House Group information, our calendar, our photo galleries, newsletters, links to other web pages, a whole collection of historic Redlands maps and biographies. So we'll first show you the Explorer app. This is a handy page. Not only you can use it, download it and use it on your phone, your smartphone while you're out and about and see a house that you might be interested. But it also can be used from the website. So you go to the bottom here and click. And this is the explanation of the app, Explorer app, and you can download it for your Apple phone, for your Android phones, or just run the web app from the website. And these are the different maps, base maps that you can have: Sanborn maps, a regular street map, aerial photos. The second shows you a listing of, you can do searches for buildings of craftsman style or Victorian style, or by builder or architect. Like I mentioned, the base map, there's various options for the base map. And then the actual citation, and this shows you the citation of the particular home that you might be interested in. So we encourage you to play around with this and have fun when you're out and about. We developed the app from our assistance with the 2 students from the University of Redlands who helped us develop the app, and it's been a great fun project for us. Ben, do you have anything additionally that we can mention about the app?
Only that if you're interested in just giving it a quick try, running the web app is just as simple as clicking on the box. There's nothing to install in terms of the web app, although the mobile apps for iOS and Android do give you a little better functionality.
Okay, so then onward to our new resource, and that's our photo galleries. Here we have our photo galleries listed by topics. We have Redlands historic postcards, photos of public places, photos of lost Redlands buildings, historic people, Redlands people, our historic map collection, historic Redlands buildings, historic markers, historic events, and contemporary Redlands. So if you click on the historic Redlands people, this is our collection of approximately 250 biographies that we posted with, where possible, photos of the individual and a brief biography of the person. So we can go to Charles Abbey, and here we got his biography from the Illustrated Redlands, which was published in 1897. During the last year or so, Tom has collected obituaries of people over the years, so we've added that, where we have pictures and information on the various people. And they're listed alphabetically, and you can scroll down and find the person that you might be interested in. Recently, though, we were contacted by the family of Joseph E. Brown. His picture and biography were not previously on our website, but his great-grandson, who lives in Orange County, contacted us and asked if we would like to have his picture and a brief information about him. He was a volunteer of the 1st Redlands Fire Company and became the chief of the volunteer fire department. So we have his picture here, and we're happy to add that. They also sent a group photo of the volunteer fireman of 1905, and this is his ex-chief badge that he was awarded. So we're really happy and pleased to add this addition to our collection. And we would encourage any of you that have similar photos and information would love to add them. But let me show you how we cross-reference the people with the places. So if we go to back to our Explorer app, and oh no, I'll take that back. I'm going to go to our Heritage Awards. And here you can find the Heritage Awards by location, or if by award year. So let's pick 1976. And here are the homes that were awarded in 1976. And let's pick the Bernard H. Jacobs and Andrew N. Dyke home. This is on Cypress. And you'll see here, we scroll down that if the biography of the person is in our collection, then it's highlighted in orange. And you just click that, their name, and their biography comes up. So it's a really handy cross-reference of the biographies and the places where the people lived. Okay, so let's go on to the timeline. So I will close mine and let Ben and Tom take over.
Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, Tom, do you want to proceed?
Sure. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the timeline itself. The first timeline that was made on Redlands was done by the Redlands Daily Fax in 1895, and they printed it, and then they printed a hard copies which they gave out to individual subscribers. And it was thanks to James Glover, who had been on the city council, and George Cook, who owned the first store in Redlands, Curtis Wells, who was a banker, Union Bank, and Charles Truesdale owned the first, bought the first land from Judson and Brown in the Redlands subdivision. So they did that in 1895. Then Scipio Craig helped Luther Ingersoll with his Annals of San Bernardino County History, 1769 and 1904. And Craig was able to, off the top of his head, give most of the early dates on things that happened in Redlands. And Ingersoll, of course, printed his book. It came out in 1904. And so that timeline ended in 1904. The next timeline was done by the Redlands, for the Redlands Golden Jubilee in 1938, the 50th anniversary of Redlands. And Frank Moore and Bill Moore, the Redlands Daily Fax, Paul Allen, and several other people contributed to that and added to it. George Beatty had all kinds of information about the assistencia, which he put in. And then in 1967, the Prospect Park book was done, and it included all the Redlands famous firsts of that time period. And so those are some of the first timelines that I use. Then I have indexed the Redlands Daily Fax from 1890 to about 1970. And then Lagonia Chronicle, which was only 1 year, 1887 to 1888. And the Citrograph from 1887 to 1908. And from that, I was able to add all kinds of dates and things happening. In putting together the timeline, I started about 10 years ago, and my ulterior motive was really so that I could find things quickly. When people asked me questions, I always had to search. I had biographies, and I had to go through my alphabetical order to find the right biography. I had all the A's, B's, and C's and all in one place. And so the things that have been added by Ben Parker and Ron Running have really added to what was my 127-page outline by adding real life to the story and history of Redlands. I used all the printed books on Redlands, and then I discovered that most of the early local history people, like myself, copy previous books which have errors, and those errors ended up being repeated. So I ended up spending a lot of time correcting the mistakes that had been made earlier, which was kind of fun because at least I knew when I had one mistake, I could count on it. I wanted a timeline that was on Redlands, okay? And so my problem was, well, where is Redlands? Well, at first I used the original 1888 map that was drawn by our first city engineer. But then I realized, well, Redlands starts before 1888. If you really get down to it, it starts in 1869 with Barry Roberts coming and settling along what is now known as Pioneer Street. So exactly where Citrus Valley High School is today, original settlement was there. And so I wanted to include that. And then of course the Mill Creek Zaha is, well, it's 12 miles long. It starts outside the city of Redlands in Crafton and Green Spot, and it ends west of Redlands all the way down in Bryn Mawr and Loma Linda. I also wanted to include the Bear Valley Dam. So while I had said I wanted to make sure I stayed on Redlands, I realized that, well, if the Zaha is built to Guachama, which is in Loma Linda on Mission Road, which is in Loma Linda, I had to break my own rules. And then I thought, well, what about Myron Crafts and Crafton? Because that's 1861. And then the Redlands Electric Light and Power Company up in Santa Ana Canyon. And then, of course, the Redlands Electric Light Company up in Mill Creek. So I very quickly began to break my own rules if I could show that there was a connection to areas outside of Redlands that connected to Redlands. The Lugo San Bernardino land grant went right through the middle of Redlands, 1 mile wide and about 3 miles long. So I wanted to include that. Then I thought, okay, what don't I want? What is repetitive? It really doesn't tell the story of Redlands. And I thought, well, sports. So if you're a high school, unless you win CIF in your sport, your individual football games, your individual soccer games, they're not in my timeline. With religion, meeting every Saturday or Sunday, I only keep that to when a church is built or it has some unusual function going on that really shows a highlight that should be pointed out, then I include it. City government, I of course want to include the fire department, the city manager system, city council meetings that are significant, and major city ordinances that really change things. Clubs, Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, Fortnightly, Historical Society, but we have 50 clubs in 1904, and most of them only last 1 or 2 years. They didn't accomplish much, and so after I got started, I realized they really weren't that significant. I went through and deleted some of the clubs that didn't really last very long. Major events like the 4th of July band getting started, Redlands' first bicycle classic, the run through Redlands, Redlands Bowl, dedication of parks. And of course, I did allow one breaking of the rule for Ron Running because he was putting in so much work. He wanted to have the United States presidents. And so each decade has the United States president elected during that time period. I grimaced at the whole thought that these guys weren't in Redlands. None of them slept here. But at least I know that 3 visited Redlands, and of course that's very much in the timeline. But other than national events, if they didn't happen in Redlands or they had no impact here, sorry, they're not in the timeline. So I'm hoping that somebody will take this up after I've finished and continue adding to the timeline year by year, because I see this as a project that really never ends. I'm up to, as I said, 126 pages, 127 pages now. And 2021 is mostly, you know, everything is the pandemic and COVID-19, which is kind of depressing. But when we end up having virtual meetings and we end up having virtual run through Redlands and virtual, everything is virtual. The only way to really show the impact of the pandemic is to show all the things that have been affected in Redlands, because we don't have a pandemic very often. So I look back through 1918 and I have a pandemic, and it has one line. And so maybe we'll edit out all the other things on this pandemic when we get further along. So Ben, it's all yours.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Excuse me.
Oh,
I believe it was about 2.5 years ago when you, Ron, approached me about the possibility of getting Tom's timeline put onto the internet so it would be available to society members and the public. And at that time, we decided to make it an Esri story map. And that's the way it has existed for these last couple of years and continues to exist. So for those of you in the audience who aren't familiar with Esri story maps, here's a quick summary of what they are. They are web-based presentations. And what that means is people view them through an internet browser. Esri story maps typically use text, maps, pictures, maybe videos, different kinds of media to tell their story. And they're all developed and hosted on Esri's ArcGIS Online service. That's the Esri cloud, you might say. Now, ArcGIS Online is a very high-powered service used by many of the largest companies in the world for work that's critical to their operation. So here we are, a humble historical society, basically taking advantage of some of the best software development tools and the high-powered cloud processing, even though, again, we are just a very humble nonprofit. And that's due to Esri's generosity in making these kind of tools available to societies like our own. And why did we choose a story map for the timeline? Well, in the story map development environment, it's quite easy to mix text, maps, and pictures, all of which we felt were sort of critical to bring out the best in the timeline and convey its information. It's fairly easy to organize the content and to make the content interactive. Because of the size of the timeline, which I think, Tom, it's over 100 pages now in its raw form, we wanted to be able to let people jump around and not have to approach it like in a linear fashion. And another thing that's nice about story maps is it's quite possible to link in external content. And there are some places in the timeline where we link in Wikipedia pages and things like that to provide the viewer with additional information. You know, from the standpoint of someone viewing the timeline, the story map format is nice because, again, they don't have to install anything. As I mentioned, it runs under a browser like Chrome or Edge, Firefox, etc. All they have to do to run it is just click on the link on the Historical Society's website, and they can do that from pretty much any platform that has a browser, which is pretty much everything these days. One word of warning, though, on your cell phones and small screen devices, the story map format tries to adapt itself to the limited resolution, and the experience isn't quite as pleasant as when you have a nice large monitor in front of you, but it is still usable. So we go through a sort of a regular process with Tom providing us updates that have to be incorporated into the story map. He basically gives me a Word document, which is the complete timeline. I compare it to his previous version to identify all the changes right down to single characters. We go through and make new map pop-ups. These are reference points on the maps that correspond to timeline entries. We either find old photos or take new ones as appropriate. We put the new text and pictures in and then link in the map points to the text. And finally, we update a little section in the front of the timeline story map that gives the viewers a quick summary of what's been updated recently. So since it first was developed a couple years back, there's been quite a few new things going in. As Tom mentioned, the text continues to evolve, picking up recent events. And as Tom's research into the past continues, he updates and expands on historical entries. The biography links, those are a really cool addition that have gone in recently, thanks to Ron's effort. Ron put these hundreds of biographies on the Society's webpage, and we now have links from the timeline text to those biographies that make it very easy to pull them up. Of course, we're always adding more maps and pictures, and one of the ones that's most notable is Chris Olson, some time ago digitized and georeferenced the 1894 Sanborn fire insurance map. We'll get to see that further down in the presentation, but it's a very high resolution map and provides some really neat insights into what Redlands looked like in 1894. And finally, one other new feature is we've always had the ability to click on points in the text and have a map come up of where those events occurred. But now we've added some new links to not only show contemporary maps, but to show aerial imagery. So that's sort of neat. So we want to give you a demonstration tonight of these new features. So to do that, we're going to fire up the story map and take a sojourn through the timeline from the pandemic. Now that encompasses a lot of territory, so we're going to have to skip around a little bit, but I think you'll still find some interesting points along the way. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and switch over to, no, that's not what I want to do. Switch over to the Historical Society screen. Okay, so this is the same Society webpage that Ron had showed you earlier. So I'm going to go over to Resources, as he showed before, and pick the Redlands timeline. There's a quick summary here of what it's about. And down below, there's a clickable point to actually bring up the timeline. So it's pretty much that simple, he says, as we wait for the screen. There it is. And immediately you'll get an idea of how the timeline story map is formatted. We basically have a scrollable column of text over on the left and a map on the right. Now, the timeline is organized into sections, usually by time, well, always by time period, except for this introductory part. And the time periods are usually decades, but they can be other periods of time depending on how much activity there is in that particular era. Now, over on the far left are a series of bullets that can be used to go directly to a time period. Like if I clicked on this, it would take us to 1870. But a simpler way is just to scroll down on the left, and that will take you through the introductory section and bring up the first time period, 1800 to 1849. Now you may notice the map changed, and that happens pretty generally as you scroll through the different time periods or jump directly to them, as the case may be. The map is interactive. You can scroll it, zoom it in and out. And if you zoom out far enough, you'll see that what we have here is an old map overlaid on top of a current map. And this is a technique that's common in GIS called layering. And we have a little thing called the layer list, which lets you turn the old map on and off. And it even lets you select some alternate maps depending on the time period. So here's an 1853 map of the Southwest that a person could choose as an alternate. In addition to the layer list letting you choose old maps to overlay the current maps, we have a thing called the base map gallery, which lets people choose different formats for the base map. So like this one is a National Geographic style. And another popular one to look at is aerial imagery, which is basically the satellite or aerial views of the locations. You can see it gets down to quite amount of detail, pretty much identify individual houses. Now, as you use the layer list and the base map gallery to explore these different views that are available, once you want to go back to the default view, you can always just click on the little bullet that corresponds to your time period. It'll bring you back to basically where you started for that time period. Now, you've also probably noticed some of the text on the left is in orange, and we have these orange dots on the map. Basically, the orange dots are entries from the timeline, again, positioned on the map to be where they occurred. And you could explore the timeline just by clicking on dots if you wanted, but a lot more convenient way is to click on the orange text, and it'll position the map to the location that's being referenced. Now, I mentioned earlier about the base map gallery and the layer list. You don't have to fool with all those unless you really want to. These orange sections of text, followed by orange asterisks, basically are making selections of different layers and different base maps to sort of show you the views as you might see if you went through and did it manually. So for example, this first click brought up the old map, but if I click on the second point there, the asterisk, now we're seeing where Guachama Indian Village was located in Loma Linda on a current map. And there's another asterisk. If I click on that, it basically shows us with the imagery as the base map. Now, again, you can always click on the bullet to get back to the default screen, or you can click on the back button up at the top when you've been exploring around like that. This red line, by the way, is Zaha. So let's start diving into the history. We're not going to have time, of course, to explore all of the timeline entries. That would be a monumental task, actually. So we'll just jump around and hit some of the high points and some interesting points along the way. So let's start here with the 1819 entry. San Gabriel Mission sends Padre Alvarez to construct the Mill Creek Zaha irrigation canal. Gabrielino leader Solano and Native Americans build the ditch using shovels and other tools made in the blacksmith shop at Mission San Gabriel. The channel runs through the site of future Redlands. And we've got these clickable links. We can see where the Mission San Gabriel was in relation to our valley. And we can see it by clicking the other asterisks in either the current era or using the aerial view again. I'll skip along there. So Tom, do you want to tell us about the Mill Creek Zaha and why it is so significant in Redlands history?
Well, the Native Americans, mostly Coahia, that were living along what is Mission Road in Loma Linda, saw the good food that they were eating in San Gabriel, corn and wheat and barley and oats. And while the Native Americans are eating basically ground acorns and rabbits and other small animals that they could trap or kill. And so the food variety looked really tempting. The problem was they didn't want to give up their way of life and move to the San Gabriel Mission because the missions had a really high death rate because of smallpox. And they also didn't want to move because men and women were separated. And so there were a number of reasons they wanted to stay put where they were located. And so they invited San Gabriel missionaries to send somebody out to start a cattle ranch, an estancia. And so in 1819, the Native Americans in the area helped build the Mill Creek Zaha, which was to teach the Indians agriculture. And of course, Major Domo Carlos Garcia constructed an adobe building to store all the grain and all the squash and peas and other things the Native Americans grew there. And it became really a viable place. It's not until 1830 that the estancia, which we misnamed the Asistencia, was built up on Barton Hill. And when George Beatty made that mistake, he was following the information that had been printed in 1902 by a Catholic priest who was in charge of the church in Colton. And Beatty assumed that that information that was in there about estancia was correct. And it wasn't until later they began to doubt what he saw, what he found. And then in 1988, a church historian really set us straight and said it never was an asistencia, it was an estancia, and we should probably rename it that. But if you want to have weddings and tours, you probably want to visit an asistencia because that has higher authority as far as a mission outpost, whereas an estancia is basically a cattle headquarters. But it was really tough for me to go through and correct what George Beatty had placed as the early history that he had written back in the 1940s. But when history is changing all the time, and I'll probably be editing some of the stuff I put in years to come when we find out more correct information later on.
Okay. Now, there's a lot of early history of the valley here in the timeline that, because of time constraints, we're just going to have to sort of skip along through. But 1834, the mission system was closed down by the Mexican government, and a lot of the church properties were opened up for private ownership. By 1842, the big San Bernardino land grant that Tom had mentioned earlier takes place, giving the Lugo family access and ranching rights to pretty much the entire San Bernardino Valley and portions even all the way up into Yucaipa. The view here is showing it on the old map. I'll bring it up here. It shows it on a current map. And as Tom mentioned, there's this sort of narrow corridor that goes through current day Redlands. And it's no coincidence that the Zaha runs right along through that corridor.
Yeah,
go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, they chose that because, and the Mormons were given a choice by the federal government that said, well, you think you own 75,000 acres, but you don't. We've measured it and you own 35,600 acres. But because we are really taking away half your land, we'll let you choose where you want to have it. But you can create a gerrymander, but it must be contiguous. In other words, you can't have little islands over here and over there. Well, they wanted the Yucaipa Valley, they wanted the Mill Creek Zaha, and so that explains that from Tennessee Street all the way to Crafton Avenue and 1 mile wide, with the center of that line being East Citrus Avenue is the center. Citrus Avenue is the center of that line, and it's a half mile north and south of there. The southern boundary would be Fifth Avenue, which earlier was called Yucaipa Avenue because it would take you to Yucaipa and Sand Canyon.
As we move along through the history, here's a early pioneer who is very noteworthy, Maria Armenta Bermudez. I'll click on her name and up comes her biography, which is one of the ones Ron has placed on our website. I'm afraid we don't have a lot of time to talk about her, but she is, like I say, a very noteworthy figure in the early days of the valley. And her life story is absolutely amazing. If you have time sometime, it's a very good read. You may notice after her name, there's another asterisk. That'll take you to the biography that the San Bernardino City put on their website. One of the things she did was make this little spur line down from the Zaha called the Bermuda's Ditch. So anyway, as Tom mentioned, the Lugos ended up selling out to the Mormons, and the Mormons left. And like I say, there's so much history down in the early part, it's frustrating to have to skip over it so fast, but let's jump ahead to the 1870s. This is the decade before Redlands comes into existence. You can see on the map, Crafton has some activity going around it, that orange circle up around Lagonia. There's quite a bit of development, but in the Redlands area itself, things are pretty quiet. Although there is an area around the old estancia called Old San Bernardino that has quite a bit of development going on too with Dr. Barton. So we start to see in the timeline some figures coming in that will feature prominently later in Redlands history. Israel Beale, born a slave, but came to California a free man after the Civil War, became a very respected citizen of Redlands. Colonel William Tolles, another Civil War veteran, who came to Redlands around 1873. It's in the 1870s that Judson and Brown first start appearing in the timeline. So a lot going on. But Colonel Tolles is especially significant for one reason. Tom, do you want to talk about that?
He's the first to plant oranges in Redlands. In 1874, he planted the first orange grove in Redlands on the corner of Church and Pennsylvania Avenue. And he used rotten Tahiti oranges. They weren't Nabels, but 1874 is early. The only earlier one in the area for us would be Myron Crafts planted citrus in 1870, and the Crams in Highland planted in 1869. Often people read Redlands history books and say, well, the first orange grove in Redlands was at Center and Cypress. Well, that's 1881. Judson and Brown have the person who planted all the ornamental trees along Redlands plant that orange grove, and it was a experimental grove in 1881 in the Redlands subdivision. There was no Redlands in 1881. There was a Redlands subdivision, and it was advertised as being in Lagonia.
Huh.
We don't have the name Redlands officially until 1888, and then it applies to all of Redlands and Lagonia. So the Tolles Grove really shoots back things almost another decade in terms of citrus industry.
Neat. Well, as we continue our hop, skip, and a jump through Redlands history, let's get to Redlands. I'll show you a new feature of the story map now. You may notice the map here is quite different from the ones we've been seeing earlier. It's a bird's eye view. And I'm going to take advantage of a feature of the story map, which is going full screen on the map, to show it to you. Let's see here. So basically, this is a 1882 map done by Judson and Brown of the Redlands colony, as they called it in those days. Tom, do you want to tell us a bit about this map and its significance?
This map, it was drawn as an advertisement by Frank Brown in 1882, and it was placed in a fold-out ad in the history of San Bernardino and San Diego counties. And it was the first major advertising that Judson and Brown did. And of course, they have Prospect Hotel number 4, and they have a reservoir on the end of Cajon Street. On the north end of Cajon Street, you can see the dam going across there. That never existed. Then they have their actual Redlands Reservoir. Just go a little bit further to the north and you'll see the dam for it. And it shows—
That's where Ford Park is now, correct?
Yeah, Ford Park is, or actually the dog park is today, is where the reservoir used to be. And then, of course, it shows Mill Creek's on. It shows development and green spot, and it shows the Judson and Brown ditch coming across the Santa Ana Wash over into Redlands itself. He included some things on here like the telephone line to his house, number 7 on the far left, and Cypress Avenue extending down. And the telephone line is coming all the way from Anaheim for our first service. So he had both telephone and telegraph service at his house. It drove his family crazy with the telephone calls. So they moved the telephone to their office in Lagonia because it was such a bother. People from the mountains, people from Banning and Beaumont, Agua Caliente, today we call Palm Springs, came all the way to Redlands to use the telephone. And they weren't shy about knocking on your door at midnight to ask to use your telephone. So each one of those little patches of what looks like trees are some of the first groves and vineyards that were planted. You'll notice that there's a fountain on the corner of Cypress and Center Street, right in the center of the map. That fountain was never put into place. Brown got the idea of a fountain because the Chaffee brothers did that in Ontario, and it really stopped the trains because they thought they were in the desert and they see this huge fountain shooting up water. But actually the fountain was never going to be there. It was going to be on West Palm and Center Street. And number 8 is Judson's house. And the reason they weren't able to put that on the earliest, or to put that into fashion, is because in 1882, Judson has built his house there on that corner of Palm and Center Street, but they don't own the property. It's 160 acres. That's going to be a homestead for Judson, but he doesn't own it until 1885, 1886. And so that area that we call Cypress and Center Street, 1/4 of it they don't own because it's going to be part of the homestead that they acquire later.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
And just to orient people a little bit, this corner of Center and Cypress is where the Gerard's Market is currently. And Frank Brown's house, shown on this 1882 map, is still there, right almost next to Gerard's. It's one of the houses that's been given a Society Heritage Award. Okay, I'm going to click back in the upper right corner again to return to our normal story map view. And I wanted to scroll down just briefly through the 1880s and pick out a couple quick events. There's so much here, it's painful to skip over it. The first preliminary map of Redlands that was filed by Judson and Brown. The Judson and Brown ditch that Tom mentioned. Basically, it brought water from the Santa Ana River all the way down to the Bermudas ditch, and then brought it down into Redlands, coming out by the reservoir and where Ford Park is today. Prospect House, which Tom mentioned. I guess that was an early hotel. One thing I wanted to point out here was, there's Frank Brown's house. There's a timeline entry here that mentions that the Prospect House, let's see if I can find it. Yeah. First of all, another very interesting individual from Redlands' early history, Dr. Ellen Brown Seymour, Redlands' first physician. She takes over management of Prospect House and uses Serrano Native Americans for serving the meals. Native Americans also figure in the 1883 entry where the Winery Grade Road is built. Now basically, Winery Grade is that road that winds down next to Redlands Hospital down into San Mateo Canyon. And the reason it's called Winery Grade, Tom, I'm sure you agree, is because of the winery that was down at the bottom.
Yeah, the Pache Winery dates back to 1882. And so it was quickly renamed Winery Road because it led to the Vache's Buena Vista Winery.
And again, Serrano Native Americans built that road down the slopes of San Mateo Canyon. You know, Native American labor also, of course, built the Zaha, helped with the Bermudas Ditch. And Native American vaqueros or cowboys figured very prominently in the Rancho period with the Lugos, and also during the Mission period with their cattle raising efforts. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is we don't hear a lot about the contributions of Native Americans in Redlands' early history, but they were definitely there and they were doing a lot of the work. So let's jump on ahead to actually the birth of Redlands as something like the city we know it. I've gone ahead to 1885 to 1889, and I'm going to pull up the bird's eye map there on full screen again. And you see, I'll zoom out so you can get an idea of what the whole map looks like. But transformation has taken place. You know, the 1882 map was basically a little rural community with a few scattered houses and groves. Now here in 1888, we suddenly see a city. So Tom, you want to tell us a bit about this?
Well, you can see the choo-choo train, which is Southern Pacific coming in. And then the other line that's at the bottom of the slide is Santa Fe. Santa Fe's first depot, which is just west of Orange Street. And the other line, I said that was Southern Pacific. That's actually the Redlands and San Bernardino Motor Road, or in other words, the Dinky. And they had a depot right where the Chase Bank is located today. And then you see the Redlands Street Railway starting at between 5th and 6th Street, going down State Street, turning on North or South Orange, and then turning on Cajon Street and going up Cajon. Redlands developers, Judson and Brown, said, when you buy property in Redlands, you have to pay 1/3 down, 1/3 more when water is delivered to your property, and 1/3 more when the Redlands street rail line finally goes up to the residence track. So they were really ambitious in terms of getting that done because it would bring in that last money that they needed. Frank Brown and Edward Judson are not in the black until 1891. So from the time they start Redlands and they buy property, build the Bear Valley Dam, and do all that, and they're selling, and they own 5,000 acres, they really aren't anywhere where they are successful until the 1890s. And then Frank Brown decided that he wanted to do the same thing he had done in Redlands. He wanted to do that to the San Jacinto Valley, Reno Valley, Alessandro, and the areas that are south of Redlands.
Fascinating. So I'm going to pop back into the regular view. There's so much going on in this time period, 1885 to 89, that you could do a whole presentation just on it. But I'm going to roll down real quick to just give you an example of some of the maps we have available here. This is a picture of the Windsor Hotel. This is June 11th, 1888, I believe. The Redlands Hotel Association is incorporated and builds the Windsor Hotel. So if we click on the orange text there for the Windsor Hotel, what it's done is positioned us on the bird's eye map to the actual hotel location. It's sort of, we're looking at it from behind, but it's this building right here. Now, if we click on the second asterisk, we see the location of the hotel on a sort of medium resolution old Redlands map. This isn't the best of the maps we have available, but for certain research purposes, it may have some value. The next clickable link shows us the Windsor Hotel on this wonderful 1894 Sanborn map that Chris Olson put together for us. And here you can see the just the phenomenal detail that's available. Tom, do you want to talk just briefly about Sanborn maps and why they are so detailed?
The red indicates that the building is made out of brick. Now, the yellow means that that is a balcony area. It's made out of wood. So Sanborn maps are made with the idea of, okay, how much insurance costs should we charge for this facility? Well, brick buildings are not likely to burn down like wooden buildings. The other nice thing about this Sanborn map, they pretty well surveyed everything at the time of the survey. And notice if you look just beyond the billiard room across the alley, Redlands' first city-owned building is the jail.
Ah,
Cost $600. It had one doorway and it had just an earthen floor. And no one wanted to be arrested in Redlands because in the wintertime you froze and in the summertime you baked. And so to make it more convenient for those who were in jail, we started a service justification, which was chain gang. We got to go out and work on Redlands roads, filling potholes and doing other kinds of work. The chain gang was really popular in Victorian Redlands because when you had somebody who had committed a crime, you actually physically saw them paying their debt to society. One nice thing about the jail, they got to have the same food that was being served at the Windsor Hotel. So you definitely want to be in the jail for breakfast and dinner. The rest of the time, if the sheriff was nearby, they'd bring you lunch wherever you were on the chain gang at that time. The other nice thing is the detail of every room on the first story of the hotel. They let you know exactly what it's used for. There's one interesting entry there, bar. By 1896, Redlands no longer serves alcohol. We go straight prohibition, which put a lot of our hotels into dire financial problems. The Casa Loma Hotel, which opened in 1896, couldn't even serve wine with their best meals. And the markup on alcohol for hotels is how they survive. And if you don't serve alcohol, you barely can make any money at all. And so Redlands hotel business all the way up until the end of Prohibition suffered greatly because of our law on not allowing any alcohol. That's not to say alcohol wasn't here in Redlands. We're surrounded by vineyards, and the Stillmans have a winery. There's another winery in Santa Mateo Canyon. Barton's have a winery. There are hundreds of gallons of wine nearby. And they arrive in Redlands in wagons. And at first the law says no buying or selling of alcohol in Redlands. So the vineyard people gave it away by a quart at a time. And then what you did is you paid them when there was no law enforcement officer nearby. So you didn't buy or sell, you simply picked it up as a gift, but then you paid for it later.
Free enterprise always finds a way.
Yes. So.
It's fun to look at some of these other businesses in the area too, hardware, barber, and then this one is furniture and undertaking. Interesting combination.
Eventually the Windsor became the international hotel for the Odd Fellows. It went through several names and several different changes over the years. As soon as the Casa Loma was built, that had been the most fashionable hotel to stay in. And so the fashionable people wanted to go to the Casa Loma instead.
Now, we still have a couple more asterisks here after the Windsor Hotel. Clicking on the next one shows us where the Windsor Hotel would have been on a modern map. Pretty much right out in front of the drugstore at the Redlands Mall. And the last asterisk shows us that with an aerial view. So that area has definitely changed. Now, one new feature I wanted to show you on the story map is the ability to do a search. We talked about being able to use the bullets on the left to jump to a specific time period. And we talked about being able to just literally scroll down and see everything in sequence. But you can also, on most browsers, hit a Control F. That's what I'm using here in Firefox, and search for something, let's say like the library. So it's popped us into 1894. Library Association purchases $1,000 worth of books and opens. It continues on to the library moving into the YMCA facility. And here we find the A.K. Smiley Public Library opening up for the first time. And you notice the building is quite truncated compared to the form it's in now. Indeed, when we look at the building on a map, you can see it's almost like a cross shape. Now, as we continue searching, we'll see the library as it goes through its various extensions. Here, the reference wing is added. So it's starting to look a lot more like it does nowadays. And on the map, you can see it now is taking on a more elongated shape. And if we continued on with the search, we would see all the various events in the library's history that are in the timeline, including the building of the various wings, the children's wing, the lion wing, the reference wing, and the taking down of the tower. And then because of earthquake considerations, and then many years later, the tower goes back up to take on its original form. So the search function is a very handy way to hop around and see what's going on. And I'm going to use it now to jump ahead to the 50s. And this shows us a very significant event in Redlands history. In 1957, 4 routes for Interstate 10 construction are proposed. Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about the decision about where to put the freeway?
Downtown businessmen wanted the freeway right up Redlands Boulevard. Basically Caltrans and the state wanted the freeway right up San Mateo Canyon because that was the railroad route. And after all, the freeway is headed to San Antonio Pass, and that's a more direct route. But finally, after long discussions and arguing, Redlands agreed on the route going through Lagonia and paralleling Colton Avenue and the Terrace. And one reason for doing that was it was an easy way to wipe out all those old houses on Colton Avenue and along the Terrace. So it's almost like a redevelopment plan. And the other thing is they realized, okay, we can have a 6th Street off-ramp, we can have Ford Street off-ramp, and maybe Cypress Avenue off-ramp. And for people coming from the east, that would be fine, that'd be enough. And then coming from the west, the only off-ramp we gave them was Alabama Street, Eureka, which is even Orange Street, and then finally University Street, and then finally Ford Street on the other end. So it was like we were saying, we want the freeway nearby Redlands, but we don't want the unwashed getting off and actually coming and, polluting our streets with their persons and stuff. Of course, we changed our minds as time going on to realize that the freeway is really the hub for business. And as time has gone on, the freeway has really influenced business in Redlands to move really out of the State and Orange Street area down toward the 10 freeway and the 210 freeway cross. And that migration continues to this day.
Interesting. Yeah. It's fascinating to think about how Redlands would have evolved if this South Redlands route had taken place and the Interstate 10 ran right through the intersection of Olive and San Mateo. Pretty amazing if they'd taken that approach. Okay, I think we better keep moving along here. Time is flying. Wanted to jump ahead to another very significant event in Redlands history. 1969, Redlands native Jack Dangermond and his wife Laura found Esri. The firm goes on to become the world leader in geographic information system software and a major employer in Redlands. Do you want to talk to us briefly about Esri, Tom?
I think most people don't know that philanthropy now begins and ends with Jack Dangermond. We think of the Redlands Museum getting a gift from Clara Clem and from Tim Rochford. But I would say over the years that the Dangermonds have given far more to Redlands quietly because Jack insists on not advertising what he is doing. Some people have made a big deal about the closing New York Street so his campus can expand. But overall, when you think of the thousands of jobs that have been added to Redlands, the ESRI has really replaced the Redlands citrus industry in a big way. And not only from our community, but nationally and internationally, ESRI has placed Redlands on the map.
I'm very biased because I worked there for so many years, but it really is an exceptional company. And one thing they do that doesn't get a lot of attention is the support they give to disaster management. You know, whenever there's a big hurricane or earthquake or a pandemic, they jump in with their software and volunteer employees to really help the people out who are trying to deal with the crisis and manage the recovery. So as we continue on, I'm going to search for Centennial, if I can spell it properly. Okay, pretty close. I'm going to go down a little further. 1988 was the centennial year for Redlands, and Centennial Plaza, which is a commercial development on Redlands Boulevard, was named for that occasion. Skipping ahead, got so many things. Frugal Frigate. I love that bookstore. When my kids were young, we just were there all the time. Great business. Children's bookstore. Gourmet Pizza. Many Esri lunch at Gourmet Pizza. There's just so much in the timeline here. It's so fun to go through it. I wanted to show this Lafarge Plaza. This is a development in 1989, right on the west end of the Redlands Mall. And the reason it's special, I mean, one reason is Dad Island Restaurant is there. I hate to give all these commercial plugs, but a great place to eat. If you look at the timeline entry here, the West State Archaeological Study discovers Chinese artifacts from the 1890s when they were breaking ground for this plaza. So we've got a link here. This map on the right is basically a current map of Redlands, showing the Redlands Mall, and the orange dot is Lafarge Plaza. But there's a place we can click here to see it in 1892. And of course, in 1892, this is another Sanborn map view, life was considerably different. And we see the good old Zaha. You know, we started with the Zaha, and here we are close to the end with the Zaha. Runs right through where Lafarge Plaza is now. And you see the Redlands Steam Laundry. And many Chinese immigrants were involved in supporting businesses like that. And that's probably why these artifacts are being found on that site. And a little bridge across the Zaha there to get back and forth. So anyway, just go ahead.
Lafarge Plaza is probably misnamed. There was a Lafarge that had a little restaurant there on West State Street, and supposedly rumor had it that when she was open for late night business as a prostitute, there was a red light placed that the railroad workers could see down 2nd Street to know that she was open for business. Except I've never actually ever been able to substantiate that with any arrest records or anything on Lafarge. I think what's happened here is that there is confusion between her and Madame Marie Forbon. And Forbon was on 3rd Street with a restaurant, and she was selling illegal liquor out of her restaurant on a regular basis. Once again, because her name was Madame Forbon, there was the assumption that she was a person who was the owner of a place of prostitution, but she was from France. And every woman who was a madam from France was called a Madame Forbon. And so the madam had nothing to do with her business other than she was in the restaurant business. She was arrested 14 times and was able to beat the rap each and every time. Some of her business people who came in that acquainted her restaurant and imbibed in some of the alcohol that was served were on the Redlands City Council and
Interesting.
also members of the Chamber of Commerce. I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Oh, absolutely. Anyway, let's jump on now to, I'm afraid, the rather dire events of 2020. We start out pleasantly enough with a picture of the rail work being done to bring the rail line into Redlands. But by March, we hit the ominous news. Redlands shuts down. So Tom, do you want to tell us a little bit about your coverage of the pandemic in the timeline?
Well, I cover the pandemic weekly as the Redlands Facts gives me the number of deaths that have occurred in Redlands since the pandemic began. We're up to 192 now, but we've had 22,000 people inoculated. So our death rate should start to go down because we've inoculated all the old fogies like myself and others. And so we shouldn't be having the death rate like we've had in the past. But the pandemic has had an impact on everything from the library to the city government functions, closing down, 4th of July closing down. I mean, the pandemic has been the story about how things closed down in Redlands. So now we're starting to reopen again, and that's beginning to take space up again in the timeline. But when readers get to 2020 and 2021, there won't be any doubt about how the pandemic had a huge impact on Redlands.
Mm.
That headline from the Redlands Community News really says it all, because you know, how else do you show a pandemic unless you go to the hospital and take a photograph of people in suffering in bed?
Mm. Well, I think we're pretty close to wrapping this up, but there was one thing I forgot about that I want to jump back and show really quick. I'm going to go to the 1890 time period. I forgot to mention what all these blue dots are. Basically, the blue dots are links to homes and buildings that have received heritage awards. If you click on one, you basically see a picture of the house. This is the Daniel M. Donald home, built in 1891 and awarded a Heritage Award in 1987. And there's a little more info link. If you click on that, it takes you to the website, the Society's webpage that describes the award. This is the house that's sometimes called the birthday cake house because of its interesting roof design. You can read about how that came about. And in addition to having access then to the Heritage Award page, you also have these clickable links that will take you to the biographies that Ron worked on. So all of this. So going back to the timeline, I wanted to sort of wrap things up on a little more cheerful note than the pandemic. So in addition to all the various events of merit and weight that Tom documents, there's also a little more cheerful things. Like, for example, the Orange Street Alley umbrella display, which is really cool. If you've never been there, it's worth going to see it. A lot of good eating in the alley nowadays, too. Nice restaurants. And in terms of street art, Tom picks up on things like Tim Sullivan's Orange Men, which appear in various places around Redlands, engaging in various activities. Here there's an orange man walking his little orange dog at the dog park. Over on Dearborn Street, there's an orange man riding a bicycle. And in the old days, there used to be an orange man playing the violin at the Redlands Bowl. I haven't seen him for a while, maybe on vacation. In addition to Orange Man, Tom also picks up on a lot of the murals that are around town. Let me back up just a second. So Larry Deerdorf has done a series of murals over the years. This was a neat fireworks mural. You can see clicking on the picture enlarges it. We've got a whole set of murals here. The Assistance League mural, I believe that's on Colton. I might be wrong, but you can click on any of these and see the map location that corresponds. Um, keep going here. There's murals in Orange Street Alley was why that came up. This is our Sister Cities mural over on Dearborn Street, which is very cool if you haven't seen it before. And the recent Black Lives Matter mural that was put up on near Redlands Boulevard.
We also have sculptures and the Sister Cities clock on Ed Hales Park, Molecule, which is on West Citrus Avenue between Eureka and 4th, Cold Moon, which is a sculpture that's going to be on Redlands Boulevard, and I mentioned, you already mentioned all the 4th of July committee things. We have an art commission in Redlands, and they're the ones that send their suggestions to the city council, which then agrees or disagrees on placing art in public places. And Redlands has quite a display of art now that really make the downtown area really interesting. Plus, all of the overpasses in Redlands, the Orange Street and Eureka and several others also have Redlands postcards that have been drawn on the walls. And we've got the square boxes off of Eureka Street. We used to just have a sign that said, "Welcome to Redlands," and that was it. Now we've got really interesting things to look at as you get off at the off-ramps. We've even added another display of the clubs that are in Redlands up off on Ford Street. And of course, when we come into Redlands on Redlands Boulevard, instead of seeing a dump, we see the Jenny Davis Park, and then of course, all the other clubs that are in Redlands on their plaques.
Yeah, Redlands is turning into quite a special city due to all of these efforts in terms of community street art. And we're going to wrap up here with this nice mural that Larry Deardorff recently did in Orange Street Alley. And he was presented with quite a challenge because the alley has all of this old conduit and doors and pillars and beams all over the place. But he's managed to put in this Little Rascals mural, and it just fits very naturally amongst all the obstacles. Very cute, very neat mural. And because it has so much detail, we've got a real high resolution view here. You may notice the little plus sign that's moving around like the cursor. You can use it to magnify the mural and see the detail that's in there, which is really quite amazing. Tasty bread is what they're snacking on. Over here, you can use the scroll bars to scroll down. Picture of President Roosevelt. Each time I'm clicking, it's going from the detailed view to the overview. And lastly, if we click here, we can see their song they're singing is "Happy Days Are Here Again." Hopefully that's a reasonable way to end this presentation. We'll be optimistic about the course of the pandemic. So anyway, that's pretty much our portion of the program.
Very good. Thank you so much, Tom and Ben. What I love about the timeline, it integrates modern technology with historical facts and makes it more interesting, more accessible, and more understandable. We have some questions. One of the questions was explaining the name Sanborn map. Tom, do you want to tell what the Sanborn represents?
Well, Sanborn was the name of the insurance company that sent out surveyors to any community that they thought they could sell their insurance to. So Sanborn is really the name of that particular map company. If you want to look at every Sanborn map, National Archives has a site that you can go and look at every Sanborn map across the whole United States by the name of the town. So there's some on Mentone, there's quite a few on Redlands and San Bernardino, Riverside. So if you're looking up something in particular, just go to the National Archives site.
And one thing I'll mention is we have an appendix on the timeline, which consolidates all of the Sanborn maps that we show in the different time periods in one place. you can use the layer list to pull those up as desired.
That goes into a question that I received, Ben, about the different historical maps and the aerial photos. Do you know how those have been compiled and to the extent they're available?
We took some of the maps from the Library of Congress on their online site. Some of the maps are from the Heritage Room at the Smiley Library. They have a very impressive collection, of course, of old Redlands maps. And the Sanborn maps, Chris Olson, when he was working at Esri, had digitized quite a few of those for the Redlands area and got them into Esri's online atlas. And we reference a lot of them from there. His 1894 map is newer, and we post that on our own account on ArcGIS Online. And I'll note that Chris Olson also has provided us with some historical aerial views, which are available in the appendix of the timeline.
That's great. Ron, you want to read some of the questions?
Yeah, there's another question about the Donald House on Brookside. Was there ever a candle or a spire in the middle, Tom?
There was a canvas cover on the top, giving the cake a third layer. And when Mr. Donald got married, he got married on his wife's birthday, and he had secretly built the house, had the candle lit, and then took her to the house after his marriage was complete and said, "Here is your birthday cake in your house." So it had some of the original photos that are in Smiley Library show that dome across the top. It was never placed back on again, which is a shame because it really gives that house an unusual flavor. And if you look at the exterior of the house, you can see how the cake is decorated with all of the floral arrangements going around it, which was, it's supposed to look like, a cake decoration.
There's another feature Tom mentioned that I suggested adding all the presidents just to give a historical reference. I did add one other one that maybe he doesn't know about, but I did note that Queen Elizabeth was coronated in 1952.
I'm going to take that and get rid of it.
Someone asked a question about having the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic documented. Is that anywhere in this timeline?
It's in the timeline.
We could probably do just the Control F, like you said, Ben, and try to find
Or
that.
search for flu or 1918.
Mm-hmm. All right. I think these maps were really wild to see, and the comparison was really awesome. Obviously, Esri uses them in the private sector too, but can you give us some examples of how they would be used by anybody besides municipalities and
You
historical
mean
societies?
story maps?
Mm-hmm.
The story maps?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's an interesting capability that they provide through these story maps. It makes it very easy to put together presentations that mix different kinds of media, videos, text, and maps and things, also making it very interactive and also at the same time sort of easy to scroll through sequentially to tell a story one step at a time, presenting the various media or map aspects as you go along. So anyone that has a presentation to do, different businesses might use a story map to present their products, or different companies might use a story map to sell an idea for a new project that they want to initiate, like a solar farm in the desert or whatever. Mm-hmm. A story map could combine the maps with video testimonials from the community on the impact, and it's just a great way to integrate a bunch of different kind of information.
Sure, it makes it much more engaging.
Oh, and one thing I'll mention too is the format we use on the story map with the scrollable column of text on the left and the map on the right is just one of the many formats of story maps they make available. There are quite a few other different ones that organize the information in different ways, sometimes as a tabbed presentation, other times as sort of a list of places that you can click through and see. So there's a lot of different flavors of story maps in addition to the one we used.
Wow. So what are the future plans for this website? Tell us what we can expect.
Well, as long as Tom is still alive, he's going to add new dates as more information maps and other things like that are discovered. We'll add where we can, and as long as Ben is living in the area, we can make that happen.
Great. That's really exciting. Well, I echo all of the comments that says this is amazing and useful, and holy crap, way to go. This is really quite a feat.
Our next meeting will be on April 26th, and we're going to dive into the Redlands historical biographies on our website, highlighting some of the interesting, bizarre, and noteworthy biographies. But we do strongly want to encourage people to send us suggestions, and we'll see if we can add as many as we can.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, we got some more hands raised.
Oh, we do?
Maybe not. Or maybe
Well.
that's clapping.
Well, we'll be sending a follow-up email if you have any additional questions, or if you have any people on the website that you want to add or get biographies from, please feel free to email us and we'll try to follow up in next month's presentation.
And Aaron, will this be posted on the Facebook page as well?
Yep, it is being recorded and will be posted on Facebook immediately after.
Great. All right.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone for attending. See you next month.
Thanks.